In a military setting, something disrespectful happens to an old veteran, leading to a shocking reveal later. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The sun was barely over the pine trees lining the perimeter fence when the checkpoint at Fort Halston started to buzz to life. The way it did every weekday morning, engines idling in a long line, ID cards flashing in gloved hands, young military police moving with that mix of boredom and authority that comes from doing the same job too many times in a row. The main security gate was a fortress of concrete barriers, steel bollards, and weathered guard shacks, with cameras perched like watchful eyes on the corners. A massive sign out front read, "Authorized personnel only," in bold letters, but everyone ignored it because, for them, this was just how you got to work. On this particular morning, though, someone new was in that line, not in a car, not in uniform, but on foot, moving at a slow, steady pace along the gravel shoulder. He was an elderly American man with a white beard and a faded red shirt that looked like it had seen years of washing and sun, tucked into blue jeans that had more miles in them than most of the soldiers on post. His worn boots scuffed over the gravel with the rhythm of someone who had marched far longer distances under much heavier loads, but nobody looking at him saw that. They just saw an old man with a frayed ball cap and a small canvas duffel hanging off one shoulder, heading toward a place only credentialed people were supposed to go. One of the young MPs at the gate spotted him first, a specialist with a fresh buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, hands resting confidently on his duty belt like he owned the road. "Hey, hey, hey, sir!" he called out, stepping away from the barrier and throwing a hand up. "You can't just walk up on my gate like that. Authorized vehicles only." The old man stopped just outside the painted stop line, breathing a bit heavier from the incline but not looking winded, just measured. His steel-gray eyes took in the layout, jersey barriers, retractable bollards, tire shredders, and then settled calmly on the specialist. "Morning, son," he said, voice low and steady. "I'm here for the remembrance ceremony. They told me to come to the main gate and get an escort to the memorial field." Behind the specialist, a private first-class snorted, failing to hide his smirk. "Yeah, and I'm here for the moon landing," he muttered under his breath. The specialist heard him and grinned, then turned back to the old man with a tone that tried to sound polite but came out sharp. "Ceremony? Es not for a few hours, Grandpa. Family guests come in through the visitor center, not my lane. You got a base pass." The old man patted his jeans pockets, then his shirt, then slowly opened the small duffel, pushing aside a folded jacket and an old photograph. "They said my name would be on a list," he replied, a faint crease of confusion crossing his brow. "I was told the gate would have it." The private in the guard shack leaned halfway out, holding a clipboard. "What's the name?" he shouted. The old man answered quietly, giving a last name that meant nothing to the soldiers in earshot. The private ran a finger down the list, checked the second page, and then shook his head. "Nope, not here. You sure you're in the right place, sir?" The specialist folded his arms, already annoyed. "Look, we get guys like you all the time when there's a ceremony," he said. "Old-timers who want to walk around base, tell war stories, claim they trained everybody's grandpa. It doesn't work like that. No ID, no CAC, no pass, no entry. That's how it goes." A couple of younger MPs in the nearby shack glanced over and started paying attention, sensing an easy joke. One of them muttered, "He probably just wants free coffee at the DFAC," making the others snicker. The old man didn't snap back. He didn't puff his chest or argue. He just reached carefully into his canvas bag and pulled out a small leather-bound case, the edges worn and the surface creased by time. He flipped it open to reveal a medal in a velvet bed, the ribbon faded but unmistakable in its pattern. It caught the morning light just enough to flash for a second. The specialist squinted. "What's that supposed to be?" he said, sounding more irritated than curious. "You can buy those online, you know." The private laughed outright now. "Yeah, next he's gonna tell us he used to run this place." The old man's hand closed the case gently, like he was putting a memory back in its box. He looked at the barrier, at the post where he'd once come through in a very different uniform, and then back at the young men in front of him. "I don't want trouble," he said softly. "I just want to pay my respects. Some of the names they're reading today, I knew those boys when they still had peach fuzz." The specialist rolled his eyes. "Sir, I don't care who you think you knew. If your name's not on my list, you're not crossing my gate. Step back to the visitor lane and wait for guidance." The way he said "sir" didn't sound respectful at all. Traffic began to back up, horns honking faintly as drivers craned their necks to see what was holding up the line. The other MPs shifted, their attention split between the job and the spectacle. The old man's shoulders sagged just a fraction, but his eyes stayed steady. He took one small step back, boots crunching on gravel, and in that single motion it became clear. This wasn't just a confused stranger at the wrong gate. This was a man used to following rules, even when those rules now seemed to shut him out of a place he had once bled for. And none of the young soldiers around him had the faintest idea just how much weight he carried in that quiet, weathered frame. The line of vehicles at the gate grew longer, the morning rush now fully underway, and with every passing minute, the young MPs grew more impatient with the old man standing just outside the barrier. The specialist waved the next car through with a curt motion, then spun back toward the veteran like the interruption of traffic had made him personally offended. "Sir, I'm not gonna say it again," he snapped. "You can't just stand here in the lane. You're creating a hazard. Step back behind the cones or I'm calling the duty officer." The old man shifted slightly onto his other foot, the gravel crunching under his worn boots. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, son," he said quietly. "The invitation letter said the base would be expecting me. It didn't mention the visitor center. It just said report to main gate. I did that." In the shack, the private rolled his eyes so exaggeratedly that the others laughed. "That letter probably came from Brigadier General Google," he joked. "You sure you didn't just read a flyer at the VFW, sir?" Another MP, a corporal with a patchy mustache and a chip on his shoulder, stepped out to join the fun. "Hey, old-timer, you got any idea how many guys come out here claiming they're war heroes?" he said loudly enough for the nearby drivers to hear. "We had a dude last month swear he trained Delta. Turned out he'd never left his county." The old man's eyes flicked to the corporal, then back to the specialist. The medal case was still in his hand, the leather looking even older under the direct sun. "I never said I was a hero," he replied evenly. "I said I was invited." Corporal smirked and nodded at the case. "What's that then? Your ticket? I can hop online and buy one right now. $50 and free shipping. Doesn't make me a veteran." A few of the younger MPs chuckled, shaking their heads as if they'd seen this play 100 times. One of them, standing a bit farther back, shifted uncomfortably, eyes lingering on the old man's expression. Something about his gaze didn't match the stereotype of a faker. There was no wild story, no bragging, no exaggeration. Just quiet insistence, but peer pressure is loud, and that MP bit his tongue. The specialist, now fully leaning into the role of gatekeeper, stepped closer until he was nearly toe-to-toe with the veteran. "Look, here's what's gonna happen," he said, voice low but sharp. "You're gonna step back behind that cone. You're gonna call whoever invited you and figure out which building you're supposed to go to. Until that happens, you do not, repeat, do not cross my line. You tracking, sir?" The old man nodded slowly. "I'm tracking," he said. "I just don't have a phone number. It was all in that email thing, the one my grandson read to me." He paused, then added almost apologetically, "I'm not much for computers." The corporal smirked and mimed typing on an invisible keyboard. "Shocking," he muttered. "Next he'll tell us he can't use a smartphone." The old man opened his duffel and pulled out a folded packet of paper, smoothing it out with fingers that trembled slightly, not from fear but age. "This is what they gave me at the veteran's office," he said, holding it out. "Said it would explain everything at the gate." The specialist snatched the paper with a sigh, glanced at it briefly, then scoffed. "This is just the program for the memorial service," he said. "No barcode, no pass, no instruction. You can't wave a piece of paper at the gate and expect to walk onto a secure installation." He crumpled the corner slightly as he passed it back. The old man gently took it, smoothing the bent edge with almost painful care. His voice dropped even lower. "There's a name on there," he said, tapping the print. "Guest of honor, Sergeant Major." He spoke a full name that rolled easily off his tongue, a name printed in bold near the top. "That's me." That earned outright laughter from the corporal, who slapped another MP on the arm. "You hear that? He's the guest of honor now. Man, these guys get creative." The specialist shook his head. "Sir, I don't know who filled this out," he said, waving vaguely at the page, "but if you were that important, somebody would be here to meet you, not leaving you wandering up to my gate in Walmart jeans." The words were meant as a joke, but they landed like a slap. The old man's eyes went distant for a heartbeat, like he was suddenly somewhere else, somewhere with sand instead of gravel, heat that came with gunfire instead of morning sun, gates that didn't keep him out but kept others from getting in. He inhaled slowly, then released the breath. "Maybe they forgot," he said softly. "Wouldn't be the first time the army forgot a promise." One of the MPs snickered at that. "Well, at least he knows that much," he quipped. The specialist, feeling the eyes of the waiting drivers on his back, decided he needed to reassert control. "Sir, if you don't move, I'm going to have to detain you for obstruction," he said, one hand drifting toward his radio. "I'm not playing. You're interfering with operations now." Another car honked, a captain inside glaring at the scene as his clock ticked toward late. The old man looked at the line, then at the gate he could see through, buildings, flags, a distant patch of grass where chairs were being set up around a stone wall carved with names. I came a long way, he murmured, almost to himself. Drove all night, haven't been back here since. He let the sentence trail off. The specialist didn't care about the rest. Not my problem, he said flatly. Step back, now. The disrespect, once just snide comments and rolled eyes, had hardened into something more deliberate. A young man flexing authority over someone he thought was powerless. The other MPs watched, some amused, some uneasy, as the oldest man on the road that morning stood at the threshold of a base he had once defended, treated like an annoyance instead of a guest. Somewhere beyond the trees on the other side of the fence, a bugle started warming up for the ceremony sound check, the faint notes drifting on the breeze. The old veteran tilted his head at the familiar sound, but the specialist only heard it as another noise in an already busy morning. To him, this was just another slowdown at the gate. To the veteran, it felt like the past standing on one side of the barrier, and everything he'd given standing on the other. Just as the tension at the gate seemed ready to snap, the sound of an engine deeper down the access road cut through the honks and murmurs. A different tone from the sedans and pickups in line, lower, heavier, more deliberate. A black SUV convoy rolled into view around the bend, headlights on despite the full daylight, followed by two more vehicles with small flags fluttering from short staffs on the front bumpers. The MPs straightened instinctively. This wasn't just any traffic. The corporal cursed under his breath. VIP movement, he muttered. Perfect timing. The specialist glanced back, annoyed. We gotta clear the lane, he said, turning to the old man. Sir, last warning, get behind the cones right now. We have a high-ranking officer inbound. The old man didn't move immediately. His eyes had shifted beyond the barrier, tracking the convoy. His expression changing from tired frustration to something more guarded, like he recognized the choreography of the vehicles. The spacing, the security posture, the way the lead SUV's driver scanned the surroundings with practiced sweeps. The bugle in the distance stopped, replaced by the low hum of bass loudspeakers crackling to life somewhere beyond the fence. The convoy rolled up to the gate, and the lead SUV stopped exactly at the painted line. The specialist hurried to the driver's side to check credentials while the other MPs moved with textbook precision, setting the scene like they'd been trained for, weapons slung across chests, eyes sharp, back straight. The corporal took one last jab at the old man as he moved. You picked the wrong time to cosplay as a sergeant major, Grandpa, he muttered. The SUV window slid down, revealing a stern-faced driver in a crisp uniform, credentials already in hand. Behind him, through the tinted glass, the outline of a high-ranking officer could be seen, chest full of ribbons, shoulders broad under the weight of rank. The specialist took the ID, his eyes widening slightly as he read the name and the rank, Major General. He snapped into a salute so fast his elbow nearly clipped the mirror. Good morning, sir, he barked. Apologies for the delay. We had a minor issue at the gate. The general's gaze slid past him, scanning the scene with the detached awareness of someone who'd seen 100 gates, 100 bases, 100 mornings like this one. What kind of issue, specialist? He asked, voice deep and impatient. We're on a schedule for the memorial. The specialist swallowed. Just a civilian trying to walk up without credentials, sir. I'm handling it. The general's eyes drifted toward the edge of the lane, where the old veteran stood, clutching his folded paper and leather case, his red shirt standing out against the concrete and tan uniforms. For a split second, the general's expression stayed neutral. Then his eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, his gaze locking onto the old man's face like a magnet snapping to steel. The air around the gate seemed to change temperature. The general's voice, when he spoke again, had lost its bored edge. Specialist, he said slowly. Who exactly is that man? The specialist didn't even look back. Just some old guy claiming he's on the list, sir, he replied. Says he's the guest of honor. We checked, name's not on the gate roster. Probably confused. Happens a lot with these older vets. A beat of silence stretched long and thin. In the second SUV, a lieutenant colonel glanced out his window, following the general's line of sight. His face shifted from curiosity to shock. Sir, he whispered, barely audible, is that? The general pushed his door open before anyone could react. He stepped out of the SUV with a speed that made the MPs flinch, his boots hitting the pavement like a judge's gavel. The specialist spun around, startled. Sir, we can bring him to you. No need to. But the general was already walking, striding straight toward the old man at the edge of the checkpoint, his gaze locked, his jaw tight, something like disbelief tightening his features. Conversations at the gate died mid-sentence. Drivers craned their necks, watching. The other MPs froze in place, their training short-circuiting as the most powerful man on the base ignored protocol and walked directly past them without so much as a nod. The corporal took half a step after him, then stopped, sensing that whatever was happening was far above his pay grade. The old veteran stood very still as the general approached, his eyes narrowing just slightly, as if he, too, were trying to reconcile the polished officer from the convoy with some younger face from long ago. The general stopped 2 paces away, staring in silence that stretched longer than anyone expected. For the first time that morning, the old man looked unsure, not frightened, not intimidated, just wary of an old ghost walking back into his life wearing new rank. It can't be," the general said quietly, almost to himself. "No, they told us you were gone." The MPs exchanged looks. Gone? What did that mean? Dead? Lost? Retired? The general took another half-step forward, his voice now loud enough for everyone near the gate to hear. "Sergeant Major," he said, addressing the old man by rank as if no time had passed at all. Then he spoke the full name that was printed in bold at the top of the memorial program in the veteran's hand. Hearing it from the general's mouth, the MPs felt their stomachs drop. The specialist's grip on his rifle tightened until his knuckles went white. The old man gave a small, tired smile. "Still here, sir," he replied. "Took me a while to get back." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The traffic noise faded into the background. The gate, a place normally ruled by routine and regulation, had become a stage where a story none of the young soldiers knew was suddenly unfolding in real time. And just like that, the power dynamic flipped. The man they'd been treating like an inconvenience was now being addressed like royalty by the base's highest-ranking officer. The world at the gate seemed to narrow to a pinpoint around the 2 men, the weathered veteran in his faded red shirt and worn boots, and the 2-star general standing in front of him like a junior soldier seeing his first commanding officer again. The MPs, the drivers, the honking cars, the security cameras, all of it faded into background noise as the general took a long, steady breath and did something none of the onlookers were prepared to see. He stepped back 1 pace, heels clicking together, spine straightening even more than before. Then, with deliberate, unmistakable form, he raised his right hand to his brow and snapped into a perfect salute. Not the casual, rushed motion of habit, but the deep, full salute of a man paying honor to someone who outranked him in all the ways that mattered. The air around them seemed to stop. The specialist's jaw dropped so far his mouth went dry. The corporal, who'd been joking minutes earlier, felt his heart slam into his ribs. The drivers in line stared through windshields and open windows, some even lifting their phones halfway before thinking better of it. The old veteran blinked once, his steel-gray eyes glistening just slightly. For a moment, he looked younger, like the years had peeled back and he was once again standing on a dusty airstrip, returning salutes with a rucksack on his back and orders in his hand. Slowly, he raised his own hand and returned the salute, his fingers trembling just a little, not from weakness, but from the surge of emotion he'd been holding back for decades. The general held it longer than protocol required, then dropped his hand and exhaled, his voice rough. "Sergeant Major," he said, his tone carrying across the entire checkpoint, "if I had known you were coming through this gate, I would have had the entire brigade lined up to greet you." The MPs stared at each other in shock. Brigade. Entire brigade, for this man in the red shirt and Walmart jeans. The corporal felt suddenly sick as he remembered his words. "I can buy that medal online. Cosplay as a sergeant major." The general turned sharply toward the specialist. "Who stopped him?" he demanded, not shouting but with an edge that cut deeper than a yell. The specialist's throat closed. I did, sir," he stammered. "I mean, we all did. His name wasn't on the gate list, and did he tell you who he was?" the general asked. "He said he was the guest of honor, sir," the specialist admitted. "But we thought—" He couldn't finish. The general's eyes hardened, but he didn't explode. Instead, he faced the entire gate detail, his voice carrying like a formation briefing. "You thought he was another old man with a story," he said. "Maybe confused, maybe trying to wander where he didn't belong. You figured you knew more about this base, its security, and its history than he did." He jabbed a thumb toward the veteran. "This man led the unit that secured this very perimeter during the worst days this base has ever seen. When riots broke out at the gate in 3, when the fence line was threatened, when the convoys rolled day and night into combat zones, he was the one on the ground, calling the shots, keeping kids barely older than you alive." Murmurs rippled through the line. One of the older NCOs in a passing truck muttered the veteran's name under his breath, eyes widening in recognition. The general continued, emotion building in his voice. "When I was a young lieutenant, green and scared and thinking rank meant I knew something, he was the one who taught me that experience outranks ego. That respect flows up and down the chain, not just one way. When our convoy got hit outside the wire and everyone else froze, he didn't. He pulled 3 of us out of burning vehicles like we were nothing but gear to be recovered. We didn't think he'd survive that deployment. Hell, half the army thought he was dead." The old man shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping to the gravel. Rumors get creative, he said softly. I just went home, figured the army had enough ghosts without me hanging around. The general shook his head, a sad smile touching his lips. You may have left, Sergeant Major, but your name never did. He turned back to the MPs, his gaze landing on the crumpled program in the veteran's hand. You see that name printed there as guest of honor? That wasn't some typo. That was my request. He tapped his own chest. I told them if he could be found, if he was still alive, I wanted him here today at that memorial to hear his men's names read in the place they trained, lived, and laughed before war took them away. The specialist swallowed hard, color draining from his face. Sir, we did. You didn't ask, the general said, quieter now but no less firm. You saw age and assumed weakness. You saw a faded shirt and assumed insignificance. You saw a medal and assumed it was fake. But what you don't understand is that the men who earned those medals the hard way don't walk around waving them. They stuff them in drawers, in boxes, in bags like his. He gestured to the canvas duffel. Because the weight they carry isn't metal, it's memory. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with shame and realization. Then, in a move that would be talked about on that base for years, the general pivoted toward the gate shack and barked, "Gate detail, attention!" The MPs snapped to it automatically, boots slamming together, eyes straight ahead. Traffic stopped completely now, drivers sensing something bigger than their schedules playing out. The general pointed at the old veteran. You will clear this lane, he ordered. You will raise that barrier, and every soldier within sight of this gate will render honors as this man passes through. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir, the MPs echoed, voices trembling, the barrier arm lifted with a soft mechanical whine that suddenly sounded ceremonial. The old veteran hesitated, looking from the open lane to the general. I didn't come here for all that, he murmured. I just wanted to sit in the back and listen to the names. The general's eyes softened. You've been sitting in the back long enough, he said. Today you walk through the front. The barrier at the gate stood fully raised now, not just as a piece of machinery, but as a symbolic line finally opening to someone who had more right than most to cross it. The general gestured toward the convoy. Sir, he said to the veteran, the word genuine, you're riding with me. The old man hesitated, looking back at the long line of cars, at the MPs still standing at attention, at the base beyond the fence that had once been his entire world. I can walk, he said quietly. Done my fair share of riding in better men's places. The general shook his head. Not today, he replied. Today they see you, they know your name, they understand what walked past them all these years while they were staring at their phones. He turned to the specialist and the corporal, their faces pale and eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the horizon as they held their rigid posture. Specialist, corporal, front and center. They marched forward, stopping in front of the veteran, their boots suddenly feeling twice as heavy. The general stepped aside, deliberately placing the three of them in a line facing each other. The specialist swallowed, hard, breaking military bearing just enough to look the old man in the eye. Sergeant Major, he began, the rank feeling strange and heavy on his tongue now that he knew it was real. His voice cracked slightly. I disrespected you. I treated you like a problem instead of a soldier. I made assumptions and I was wrong. The corporal took a breath, his bravado gone. I mocked your medal, he admitted, shame burning across his cheeks. I thought you were just pretending. I forgot that some men carry more in their silence than others do in all their stories. The old veteran studied them for a moment, his gaze not harsh but weighing. He saw young faces beneath the uniforms, the same kind of faces he'd once yelled at on training fields, the same kind he'd once pulled behind cover in firefights. You're doing a hard job, he said quietly. Gates like this, they keep bad things out. That makes you tense, makes you suspicious. That's not a bad thing. He let the words hang for a second before adding, but suspicion without humility, that's dangerous. You hear me, son? They both nodded quickly. Yes, Sergeant Major, the specialist said, voice barely above a whisper. The old man shifted his weight, boots grinding softly in the gravel. You thought you were protecting this base by keeping me out, he continued. I get that, but remember something. The uniform you wear today was paid for by the men who wore it before you. You're not guarding a piece of land, you're guarding their memory. And sometimes, those memories are standing right in front of you with white hair and bad knees and no paperwork to prove who they are. The corporal's eyes shone now, moisture gathering at the corners. What do we do with that, Sergeant Major? He asked. How do we fix what we did? The veteran gave a small, tired smile. You learn, he said simply. Next time an old fella shows up with a story that sounds too big to be true, you don't roll your eyes, you ask questions. You treat him with the same respect you hope someone gives you when your hair turns white and your boots look like mine. He glanced down at his worn leather, then back up. And you remember that rank fades, patches fray, but the way you treat people, that sticks with them and with you. The specialist's shoulders sagged under the weight of the lesson, but something in his posture eased, as if being corrected this way, publicly yet compassionately, had carved a new line of maturity into his spine. "Yes, Sergeant Major," he said again, this time as a promise. The general stepped in once more. "For the record," he said, looking around at everyone within earshot, "this man isn't just some old sergeant major. He's the reason half the senior NCOs on this post ever learned what leadership was. I want his access approved immediately, full visitor credentials, escort waived. If he wants to walk this base at midnight and stare at the fence line, he does it. He's earned that right 10 times over." A nearby operations officer who had arrived during the scene nodded quickly and began typing into a handheld device. "Yes, sir," he said. "We'll flag his name at every checkpoint." The old man shook his head slightly. "I don't need all that," he murmured. "I just wanted to hear their names." The general's gaze softened. "Then let's not keep them waiting," he replied. He turned to the MPs. "Detail, when we depart, you will present arms as we move through. Not for me, for him." The MPs snapped to attention again, this time with no hesitation, no confusion. They understood now. As the general opened the door to the SUV, the veteran paused and turned back to the younger soldiers. "One more thing," he said. They looked up eagerly. "You boys did your job," he said. "You were wrong about me, sure, but you stood your ground. Don't lose that. Just add wisdom to it. Courage without wisdom is just noise. Courage with wisdom, that's what keeps kids alive." The words settled over them like a blessing. As the veteran climbed slowly into the SUV, his joints protesting, the specialist stepped back and raised his hand in a crisp salute, this time without being ordered, without anyone watching to grade his form. The corporal followed suit, and then the entire gate detail did the same. The convoy began to roll, the SUV carrying the old man passing under the raised barrier. Every MP remained at attention, salutes held until the vehicles were well past the checkpoint. Drivers in the line watched in quiet awe, some lifting their hands in small, unsure gestures of respect. Beyond the fence, the memorial field waited rows of chairs, a podium, a stone wall etched with names. As the SUV approached, the general glanced at the veteran beside him. "You know," he said softly, "I spent my whole career trying to live up to the stories they told about you." The old man chuckled once, a dry sound full of history. "Stories always add shine," he replied. "Truth is, I was just trying to get my boys home." He turned to look at the field, at the names he'd carried in his heart for decades. "Today, I'm just here to tell them I didn't forget." And as he stepped out of the vehicle into the sunlight of the base he once guarded, every soldier in view rose to their feet, back straight, eyes respectful, not for his rank, not for his medals, but for the quiet, unshakable weight of a life spent in service, and for the lesson he'd just carved into the hearts of a new generation at the gate between the world and the warriors who protect it.